Okay, we're back on LinkedIn. This is a live remote from Los Angeles County. I won't say exactly where we are in LA County. It's not, it's a nice hotel. Say that. Well, my buddy, my brother, Dave Weiner, just for everybody's clarity, Dave and I met when we worked for Department of Energy. We were on the SWAT team together, and our careers have intermingled. And Dave has transitioned and is working in the private sector, and I think he's got a fascinating story to tell. Dave, I'm not going to steal any more thunder from you, brother. Tell your story. How you started in the military, and then things, they don't go always as planned. And it's a fascinating route that you've taken. But I'll let you start there.
Well, Scott, brother, thank you for having me on this show, which is probably going to be called "There Goes the Neighborhood and There Goes Your Ratings." So I appreciate you having me on.
It was going down anyway.
I hear you, but now you're on the fast track, right? You're downhill in a Corvette and a Hurricane. Is really where you're going.
Gotcha.
So, as you pointed out, I spent the first part of my law enforcement career as a military policeman. Moved. This is what happens on a live remote.
Of course.
Spent time as a military policeman, got out, got into civilian law enforcement, and moved around a little bit, did some time in corporate security, as you know. So I like to think of myself jack of all trades in some cases, having some great opportunities, great mentors along the way, which I think is an important part of the process. Fast forward all the way to 2019 when I decided to retire. As you know, I was the chief of police and emergency management for the VA Long Beach healthcare system. And when I was retiring, and I know we talk a lot about transition, which kind of probably leads us to our conversation today. But I think when you start talking about transition, a lot of people start thinking in terms of what other job am I going to get, right? What's my job? Like, what am I going to do? How do my skills transfer? And having a lot of your past guests who are all very accomplished and all accomplished, very impressive and professionals, all of them had very storied careers, and then they turned it into something incredibly positive by going to work for other organizations that where their skills could be used most favorably, if you will, right? That'd be accurate.
It was a lot of those folks is a logical translation or transition, right? And but you didn't necessarily want that opportunity to work for another organization, another person. I mean, you've worked at all these great organizations, and he'll be linked down below. You guys can check him out and check out his career. But you've been a part of NASA, you've been a part of the Army, you've been part of the Air Force, you've been part of the Department of Energy and the VA. I mean, those are iconic agencies that you've been part of, Gardena PD. And a logical translation or transition for you would be going into a corporate security gig. But that wasn't necessarily what you wanted. Deep down in your heart, I mean, I'm sure you were very introspective and like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? How do you want to do it? And you chose a different path. Adam Willis, who I'll link down below, calls it copterpreneurship, which I destroy every time I say it. He says it way better than I do, but
yes.
that was kind of part of your thought. But why and how what was that journey like when you're like looking at what to do and where to go?
So, yeah, to your point, there was a lot of introspection. There was a lot of kind of self-reflection and like, okay, what do I want to do? And it wasn't very clear when I retired, but I knew I wanted to do something. And when I started thinking about, well, what are my options, right? So you start with options. So what are my options? Well, I can go work somewhere. I can go apply. I can work as a security director or something along those lines, or a role commensurate with my role. In the federal system, look at my skill sets and where could I be marketable. The other thing that is less talked about is going into business for yourself and utilizing the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have acquired over decades in order and how that can be applied to your passion, right? I love what I do. So shortly after I retired, I kind of came to the conclusion after talking to some Sage folks.
Not me.
Not gonna mention any names. Scott, Wes.
Wes.
After talking to some trusted advisors, which I always think is important, having those folks around you who are going to give you sage guidance, it was like, hey brother, you should start your own business. So that's exactly what I did. I started Secure Measures LLC. We're a global risk, public safety, and business resiliency firm here in LA. We do a lot of different things, but most of the things we do are commensurate with my background. Just like you would look at somebody's resume and say, hey, they fit for this job. Why have different skills and abilities that are applicable to being in a consulting role or a training role or an advisory role for different organizations? So, I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had, and I know we're having it. But I think it needs to be had more is really what I'm getting at, because
you don't have to go work for some other person or some other organization. You can start your own thing.
Yeah, you can start your own thing, but you should be really mentally and physically prepared for what you're about to embark on. I'd say starting my own business is literally the hardest thing I've ever had to do, mainly because there's a lot of learning curves. You learn a lot when you're running a business by yourself, and realize that, again, I was the chief of police. When I worked in the department, I had a great team around me, and if I needed something, I had my team. Yeah. Now
it's you.
I'm looking around the room.
Well, it's me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm here to help.
Of course, 100%. But when you go from a role, a senior role like that, and then now all of a sudden you're having to do all these things by yourself, it can in some ways be a real challenge. But again, if you have good friends, good colleagues, and other things that you work with, it does make that journey a little bit easier. But the reality is that you can literally build a business around any passion you have. I mean, look at all the different things that people do. Innovation, is one of the things that can help. If you have an idea, it's probably, in some cases marketable, or maybe somebody's done it,
We talk a lot about, Elena Forrest talked about in her transition to her first organization, which was a security contract company. She had worked prior to getting off the job or retiring from the job. She'd work part-time. She'd work, side hustle type gigs. And that's something that, I'll just ask you, because I kind of know the answer, because we kind of did it. Would you recommend that side hustle before you transition? A lot of people don't know, and I've never said this, and we didn't talk about doing this, but we together ran a business for several years that was, it was profitable. We had clients, and we didn't go into debt. But, you think that kind of was like the training wheels, where we were all still employed in law enforcement, and I'd say we, but you really were the point person for the company. But was that a good experience for you, and that gave you this idea, like, I should just go back and do something like?
So 1,000% on the mark. So, some people could go, well, you guys were only in business for 7 years. 7 years is actually quite a long time, right? And you could say, well, the business is no longer there. That's a failure, right? We always talk about, success.
What does that mean?
Success and failure. But the reality is that venture, if you will, was educational in so many ways. And as I look back, I made a ton of errors, ton of mistakes.
We all did.
Ton. Yeah. But that's how you grow, and that's how you expand, and that's how you're able to, gain knowledge.
So you did it while you were still employed. While we were all still employed, there was three of us that kind of started this organization, this company that went out and provided services mainly to school districts. And I look at it as success as well. We were in business. We didn't know anybody anything. We always paid our employees on time, those who did work for us, and we never got stiffed by a client or a customer. No. They always paid us on time. We did a lot of great things for them, and that's my measure of success. Do you see anything different there? Is there anything else that you'd add to that?
So I think, that was also an exercise in marketing, branding,
Good point.
those type of things. Those were things that I feel we failed miserably at because we didn't market ourselves in a way that we got to a broader target audience. We were trying to do one-offs
Yeah.
rather than trying to, have a distinct brand message and
Yeah,
strategy,
we didn't do that.
branding and marketing. So, that was a lesson learned, and then administration and operations and some of the other things you need to do running a business.
Thank God for your dad, who's an accountant.
Well, dad's still fulfilling the role as the CFO,
Yeah.
mainly because Dave's bad at math.
Yeah. Me too.
And I'm probably a lazy CEO in that regard.
But you know what? I mean, honestly, like the most important thing in the business, and you know this better than even I do, the most important thing is that money, that flow of money, because money is life, right, in a business. But to have somebody you trust, your dad, who took time out of his own business
Yes.
to help you, for those who are interested in entrepreneurship and are interested in doing this, finding somebody you can trust, or having yourself be trustworthy to go do this is really important.
Well, and again, Dad, eternally grateful. More ways than you can ever imagine. But more importantly than cash flow is keeping me out of tax jail.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, totally.
And you can quickly get yourself in a lot of trouble if you're not accounting for things. If you're not
too many write-offs.
If you have too many, there's a whole host of things. And when you're trying to do these things by yourself, and that's where I was going with this before, is that you can quickly get overwhelmed with a lot of the things that businesses have to do, right? But then when we talk about like, okay, there's a lot of things, business owners put off, right? Like business resiliency. Well, I'm more worried about getting customers than worried about
whether there's a pandemic.
Yeah, whether I have a plan for the pandemic, and that in itself is an issue because now you're talking about continuity of operations and other things.
How are you going to deliver your service? How are you going to deliver your?
And fortunately, fortunately, I would say there were a number of small businesses that were able to pivot during the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
However, a great number of businesses have gone out of business because they failed to plan for that, for that event, right?
And what do you think, as for folks who might be interested in going into business for themselves, as a solo entrepreneur or as an entrepreneur, or maybe even as in a partnership, they're coming out of law enforcement, stable job, whether there's a pandemic or not, for the most part. What kind of skills do you think has made you successful? Because you've been successful, you've grown your business throughout the pandemic. What helped you?
Well, I think my background in emergency management, emergency preparedness, disaster management, having written emergency operations plans, and currently doing that same work for clients and helping them navigate some of those challenges, I think obviously was helpful. Now, obviously, not everybody has that kind of background, and to be clear, kind of to back up a little bit, there's a lot of schools of thought saying, well, nobody could have planned for the pandemic. Well, in some sense, I would agree. Nobody's going to be able to plan for the magnitude of something, but there's always something you can do to mitigate your risk against threats, risks, and hazards, right? So the reality is you should always try to do something rather than nothing is really the key I would tell people. And it's really about assessing your own operations, and it's really about taking a hard look at like, okay, what do I provide? How do I provide it? What suppliers am I reliant on to provide my product or service or whatever, and then looking at the things that can impact those things, and then working kind of in reverse and kind of reverse engineering things.
This is a great conversation because you're saying things that are very business centric, and I know people that are watching are going to be like, well, I didn't know that, or how do I figure that out, or I'm a watch commander at a police department, how does that help me in what you're talking about? What are those skills that translated for you to get you in this mindset of where you're at now today?
So, first and foremost, it's actually kind of a funny story. Many, many years ago, I had one of my one of my senior leaders when I worked for the Army, as a matter of fact. He sent several of us to incident command instructor courses because he wanted a cadre of people to train on incident command. And initially, I didn't know much about it, so I was like, why am I here kind of thing, right? I'm a cop. I don't do any of this stuff, right? But I realized later on how valuable that information is, and never look a gift horse in the mouth. When somebody wants you to go to some training that they think you might find, you never know. Basically, the lesson for me is you never know how valuable that's going to be until maybe sometimes things don't always yield those fruits until much, much later.
Well, and I think incident command, ICS or IS, or with the FEMA self-studies, and you probably went to the in-class courses, but that what I learned was communication, cross-functional communication with different organizations that are really different than yours, whether that's fire or public works or the city government, whatever it is. Do you think that the way we communicate cross-functionally during a crisis is enabled you to know how to do that with your customers and with your clients as a business owner?
100%, and I think just communication in general, I like to think, and, we shared this earlier this week about a lot of cops have the gift of gab, right? They have the ability to talk to people. With that same process works with clients, with customers. You can still translate some of those things in order to do it, but the other thing you have to do is understand culture. Every organization that I work with and that you work with, all of them have a lot of them have very radically different cultures, and you have to be willing to immerse yourself in somebody's culture to better understand their organization, to better understand their risks and threats and hazards and things. Even though there are certain things like natural disasters can impact everybody, but sometimes different organizations have different profiles. There was an entertainment company that I was doing work for, that they have a different hazard than the institution of higher learning that I work with, right? Different profiles and different things, but at the same time, a lot of the skills that we get in public safety, whether it's fire, EMS, or whatever, a lot of those public service type mentalities, that community policing, that type of thing, that is all translatable into a private sector job, like being a consultant for an organization and advising them.
What's that one piece of advice if somebody was going to ask you, like, hey, what do you recommend I do before I transition? What's that one piece of advice that you would give them?
Prepare. That's my mantra for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
My tagline: be responsible, be prepared.
Yep.
I think the reality is that a lot of people, I think, and when I say prepare, I mean start analyzing. Like if you think you're even a couple years out or a year out from retirement or leaving, it doesn't even have to be retirement. You should really start looking at, okay, what are my options? What am I thinking about? Do I have a passion? Do I want to go work somewhere else? And that may be the case.
Yep. Or do I want to start my own thing?
Or do I want to start my own thing? The other thing I would say is start seeking out mentors in some of the industries that you're working in. If you want to get into healthcare consulting, I'll use that as an example. Well, go seek out folks or look within your network. I mean, you and I use LinkedIn pretty heavily, just like a lot of our colleagues. And, I met some incredibly amazing people just by this platform. So I would say, prepare yourself in the sense that you need to start building your network. You need to start really reaching out. You need to start understanding what is out there for you.
What are those options look like?
And I can't, I'd love to say there's one thing, but there's not one thing. In my mind,
you've named like three.
There's not one thing. There's actually, it's a puzzle, and it's you have to assemble the puzzle in a way that's going to make sense for you.
Yeah.
But you can never go wrong following your passion and things that you want to do. The other thing I would suggest is joining trade groups, associations. I volunteer on boards of directors for nonprofits, like a lot of different things, and most of those are veteran and first responder centric because that's my wheelhouse. That's what I'm familiar with. but also seeking out those organizations that can be beneficial. As an example, and being a veteran, we'll shift gears here because I know we talk about we're transitioning, but there's a point I want to make here, which is, there's a ton of organizations out there that support veterans, right? Especially here in LA, we have a ton of them. But there are organizations that support veteran entrepreneurship. As an example, you have places like Bunker Labs. You have the Embedded program through Tango Squared. You have the IVMF through Syracuse University. Like, you have all of these different programs that do support, and these are all great programs and programs that I either know about or am involved with.
Part of it, yeah.
But then when you start looking at, okay, well, what's available for first responders? Like, if I want to start a business as a firefighter, there are less of those, to almost none,
Right.
because that's not even a question. Like, and we're just starting to talk about first responder mental health. We're not even close to talking about first responder entrepreneurship. But I think these are all conversations that people should have. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think hopefully there's some level of, like I said, everybody you've had on here so far has been incredibly accomplished. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with getting a job somewhere else, because we all have bills to pay. None of us are independently wealthy.
Right.
So the reality is, but what do you want to do? What's your passion? And that's what I tell people first. Figure out what your passion is, and you can build a business.
So to folks back at LinkedIn, folks following along on LinkedIn, take a look below, write down what you're interested in. Put this out to the world. The posts on this page are a safe space. You can put out there what you're interested in, what kind of things you have questions about, what kind of challenges you think you might have as a cop or law enforcement officer who's interested in entrepreneurship. Put it out there. Engage in conversation, and we will engage with you below about what that is, and we'll help you through this process. Stay tuned. We're going to have more with Dave Weiner here in a minute.